your research has explored intersection of psychedelics and extraordinary experiences, which you just talked about. What first led you to study mystical states through this lens? Like, because in a way, it is a niche, and it's also so fundamental to the human psyche, and it does take something happened that had you get interested in it. And so I'm curious what that is, or what that was.
Yes, I mean, well, many things. I mean, I guess as a child, I was always interested in altered states and curious phenomena. I used to have lots of really bizarre sleep
Mm.
experiences, or nocturnal experiences, and I would talk to the lights in the daytime, and so I've always been interested in this kind of stuff. And then as I was, getting into kind of self-study, mostly by skiving off school and going in the secondhand bookshops, I got very interested in all the kind of left field science, and psychical research. So I'd always had an interest in this, and then also developed an interest in other altered states and psychedelics as a teenager. But I didn't actually really directly study mystical experience until relatively recently, in that I was interested in these exceptional experiences, particularly as people have them with psychedelics. I did my PhD in parapsychology, so I was looking primarily at precognition. That's
Mm.
getting information, reliable information from the future. And so I was kind of interested in the kind of intersection between science and shamanism, really, through altered states, particularly through psychedelics. And 20 odd years ago, when I started to do this research, psychedelics was still very much taboo in the academy.
Yeah.
But I started exploring this overlap, and how, by studying psychedelics, we come to discover that people have all manner of extraordinary experiences, particularly these ones that fit in this kind of shamanic worldview of transcending time and space and bringing back useful information, which isn't part of the classical mystical experience, but nevertheless. And then, of course, psychedelics became much more popular in the academy. We started seeing all their potential mental health benefits again after 50 years.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, and it was actually people like, well, through the pioneering work of actually like Roland Griffiths and his team at
Yeah.
Johns Hopkins University.
So just so you know, he is a hero of mine in general, just for his pioneering research, but he was also familiar with orgasmic meditation. Um, and and said, essentially, just based on the research that he had seen, that it's on par with what you experience in a moderate to high dose of psilocybin. And that, typically it's interesting, because I don't know if I mentioned this. So I did a psychedelic assisted therapy training and research program with CIS.
Great.
I guess it must be almost 2 years, right as like
Okay.
this whole thing with the FDA was happening around MDMA, which is a whole thing I want to talk to you about. And I did it because I think it's so important that you give people vehicles, and you actually let people choose for themselves. But Roland was big in terms of what happens post trip for integration. People don't typically have it, so they often recommend meditation. But he was like, "Oh, what would happen if you also gave people Om, because it's a partnered practice?" And typically psychedelics can be, not always, but often for people, it can be pretty solo, and how to begin to introduce this idea of connection as also ongoing access to mystical states.
Amazing. Did
Yeah.
did he actually implement the own practice?
Sadly, there was not enough time. Yeah.
No, indeed. He was a great figure and a pioneer in
Yeah.
the field, Roland, and he brought the mystical experience back out of the woodwork after 50 years,
Yeah.
in terms of psychedelic experiences, which opened the door for a great deal of things to occur in that. as psychedelic assisted psychotherapy clinical trials and research started to happen, some of those researchers began to include this mystical experience measure in those studies. And when they did, they found that it very strongly predicted clinical outcomes. Like the more mystical your
Mm-hmm.
trip in the therapy, the better were your reductions of addictions,
Yeah,
depression, anxiety, trauma, etc. And so like the mystical experiences has done this whole 180, right? Uh,
totally.
whereby it was like previously either demonized or pathologized, pretty much. It's now seen to be very much part of the medicine, is part of better mental health and well-being um, in the space of a decade or so. So that's kind of great. And if you can access that through other techniques other than through
Yeah.
psychedelics, great. I mean, psychedelics are probably the most consistent and reliable and strong in producing
Yes.
effects, but uh, they're not without their own challenges, and legality being one of them, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but also the potential for challenging psychological fallout. So yeah, there are other methods we can access to get there. My guess is they all tend to have benefits on our mental health, and we see the same thing with near-death experiences, which are a kind of
Mhm.
spontaneous mystical
Yeah.
experience. People tend to come back from those experiences with just more purpose, more meaning, a deeper connection to other people, increased compassion, deeper connection to nature. And it's the same thing we find when people have mystical experiences induced in other ways as well.